Good afternoon. So we have 5 panelists, 4 speakers you've already heard. We have a 5th panelist who is Biljana Kosanovic from the University of Belgrade. Biljana has been involved in open air for many years within Serbia, and also at a national level she has done, taken forward many initiatives, including COPSON, the Library Consortium for Coordinated Acquisition. She has also developed the DOI Serbia for assigning DOIs to journals, etc. And the National PhD Thesis Portal in Serbia, and the establishment of Skindex, the Serbian Citation Index. And so lots of activities in this field from Biljana. So before we start with questions from me to the panel, are there any questions from the audience on the previous 4 talks? There's time for 1 or 2 questions. Nope, okay. Then, so I'm going to throw a question there, which is, the first one is here, where do you see gaps in the current policies landscape? Who would like to take that question? If there can be 2 or 3 of you at most answering this question, that would be great. Anybody want any takers to start with?
I'll be happy to go first.
Yeah.
I will not provide, I think, a comprehensive overview of the gaps, but today I feel like I'm the advocate of the narrow, the things close to home. So I think it's important to really look at what are the barriers to the adoption of these principles that we have. And to do that, we need this. So we need to look at the level between national policy or ambitions and what's feasible for the various research communities. And I think definitely the voice of the communities as well as the research institutions, what are their needs, so and what can be provided as resources from the institutions, and where do they need government support in legislation or similar measures, I think. So I don't have a specific topic for you. That's more a general observation, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Thanks, Ole. Anyone else like to contribute to that? Mark, you say, or yours?
Yeah, go ahead. The only thing that I can directly refer to, because actually what I presented is the assembly of all the knowledge of several projects, but I only worked directly with the GDPR and IPR issues, where I can think that. So what can be observed is that when these European laws are then dribbled down to the different countries, what happens is there will be differences, and although you cannot have all the level, there should be a level playing field. Of course, that starts with this, for instance, the GDPR, but then when effectively these are set into national laws, there are little differences that come up, especially when you try again to do, for instance, as mentioned before, the COVID research, right? But this is one gap that I would mention.
Yeah, thanks. Mark, you wanted to contribute as well to that one?
In terms of policy gaps, I think I put some questions up at the end of my talk about that relating to the international level, but perhaps another way of posing that and look is that the beginnings of those very inspirational documents about the partnership proposal and the SRIA talk about having science at the centre, and we should not forget that the S in EOSC is science, and so I think that we need to make sure that we are maintaining the policies that keep science at the centre, and so that we can really address what we need to. To answer my own question, I mean, we have task forces, for example, about user engagement and adoption, but I wonder whether I think we need to solidify those policies a bit more strongly, because we have the science cluster projects and we have the e-infrastructures, and there obviously needs to be more coordination and making sure that what we are thinking of in terms of the architecture of the EOSC matches what we need for, you know, the science. And there's a discussion which has to happen there that is in EOSC Future project, but it's also in the task forces. And as a policy forum, I'm sort of posing the question, what is it we can do that reinforces that? Because I see all the different levels. I see the users of our service, I see the partners who provide data, I see the infrastructures who we're connected with. How do we join those things together in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you. So, following on from that, Biljana, a question directly to you, is from the Serbian perspective, what do you expect from the EOSC policies to help you nationally with the advancement of open science?
Yeah. I would just want to explain something not about the Serbian case, but let's say about this small scientific community, especially referring to almost all Western Balkan countries, which is quite small ones, especially in the scientific way. So usual case is that the national policy is at the same time the funding policy, because the most of research are funded by the government. The rest is funded by the European Commission, but small percentage of that is funding by the European Commission. So, and when we are talking about the policy, there are quite strange situations, because everything about open science policy comes from the two different perspectives. One is coming from the institutions which researchers are already involved in Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020 projects, so they will have to satisfy some open science requests, not just only open access, but also some about data management, so they push the government to develop their policy. On the other level, we in small countries really have some really big help from the regional projects. In that case, I'm talking about great help we received from NIFOS from the last few years, and almost a decade from the open air community. That means that we could do something on the regional level. So, and we almost copied each other. If some of us make some improvements, so the rest are also followed. We are doing really our best. I noticed on Sofia's presentation there are few dots from our regions, which means that we are trying to do our task. But, and we have, let's say, if I come now to Serbia, we have our national policy since 2018, and the new one will include also EOSC. But what we missed is much more monitoring and much more people involvement in all these things.
Okay, thank you. So, following on from that a little bit, Sofia, a question directly to you. So what role should the steering board play in policy development, in your view?
So I think, well, the steering board has a really great value as you say, providing opportunities for country representatives and experts to have these dialogues on the policies and practices which work in the countries, and also all the challenges that accompany them as well. So it's, I mean, it's partly a forum for discussions and exchanging experiences, but also an important enabler for aligning and harmonizing national and European policies as well, and ensuring also that the national funding initiatives and infrastructures are coordinated with these policies. I think, well, it's a huge value of these creating opportunities to identify common priorities on which the European work can continue as well and being advanced. But also, I say, as being one part of the tripartite governance as well, where both the implementing organizations and the policymakers are involved, the steering board also plays a very important role in ensuring that these policies build on the community's experiences as well, and ensuring that there are channels within the tripartite governance that can enable this.
Yeah, thanks. So the other point I wanted to ask also generally here is that the point about alignment and synchronization is a theme here, right? So making sure that policies are aligned nationally, the implementation of policies are aligned nationally, and they're done also at the same time, so they're not out of sync, right? One starts years before others. So how can we improve this? What do you think, what steps should be taken to improve alignment and also synchronization of the alignment? Any thoughts on that?
So one thing that is needed is first to detect these differences, of course. Most of them are not even detected because people work around them. So one thing is, of course, collaborations and in EOSC sense, and trying to get things going in projects. Finding these differences and not step over them, analyze. But this, of course, comes together with an awareness of these things. And if you're not aware of the importance of something, you can start the project and you can draft your data management plan. You can acknowledge all the laws that go behind it with the GD, for instance, data protection things. But if you're not aware of the importance of these things, then you will just ignore them at the beginning, and then are confronted with them when you are actually analyzing data. That would be working together and be aware of the pitfalls.
Anyone else want to contribute to that? No? No? All right. How are we doing with time? Are we doing okay with time? Yeah.
A couple of questions.
Okay. Should we try the audience first, or any questions from the audience? Yeah, Volker.
I have a question for Jos. Jos, you said that it would be good to have laws in place in addition to policies. So, but I mean, putting laws into place, you have to work with the legislator, which changes. It's a moving target. Isn't this unrealistic that we aim for that? Or did you discuss how one could approach that? Because in our governance, we don't have the legislators represented.
No. So this is actually, of course, restricted to very limited set. But of course, now you mentioned the fact all these data acts and data laws that are now going into effect. Yes, you're right. You cannot. So one of the things is, of course, that if you have policies, you have to review them every now and then. Policies are probably more of a moving target than the laws. So if you do the reviews, you can actually adapt them or make them congruent again with law. So maybe this was a little bit misunderstood, because part of the work that was done on this, on the GDPR and copyright law, was done by people that are actual legal experts. So they have more the idea of a law. Personally, I don't have this. I'm more with the soft laws, where you have agreements among each other. I think that carries much further and is more adaptive to the work that we're in science. However, you need a basis to work with, because it reminds me of a saying by what was this? I think President Truman said that speak softly but carry a big stick. So somehow you need this limitation that is affected by law. And I know that it's a very sensitive thing, law and science, right? Because it's all these restrictions. But when we have to deal with cross-border things, you will not. You will have to counter this as well. Also, when it comes to data, especially when it comes to data.
Any last? Yeah.
So just a comment to that, because interestingly, in surveys in the Nordic, one of the things we found is that researchers are telling us they're more restricted by policy than by law, because often the policy of institutions is more restrictive than what the law requires, because because of fear, maybe because of worry about what are the implications of this and that, GDPR, whatever. Institutions are often, also maybe because they lack expertise in these particular fields, more restrictive than they legally would have to be. They worry about exposure, they worry about the press, they worry about lots of things. And so a soft law approach where we would give guidance and help institutions interpret the law and have best common practices for the community would actually also, I think, help dramatically rather than being very focused on changing the laws, because it's not, in our findings, what is mostly restricting what is actually being shared in data. I don't know if the mirrors what
There's
the panel
Mauro down there as well. Mauro.
Just a quick comment. This is exactly in line with the report I was presenting earlier today, the findings from that report. Yeah.
Mauro Campanella from the Italian Research Network. I think I try to understand how to split the raw data, the pure data as it is, from what has been done, is being done with the data, the analysis of the data. Most of the laws prescribe actions on the data to prevent outcomes from that actions, from that analysis. As an example, one traces of where we walk using our mobile phones. The data itself is valid in some way and may be open, but the analysis of that data creates a lot of GDPR issues and maybe more than that. I would suggest to split the two things. One thing is the raw data. Astronomically, you just look at the sky and you take a snapshot. The same can be done with other type of data. Even medical data can be set as raw data. How you use that data makes a huge difference. And this is what I would suggest that we elaborate a little bit more on that, because actually the metadata and the use of the metadata is what we are worried with, not the data itself. And I think that now we are mixing these two things together. Of course, like guns, if you want, you can have a store that sells guns, but there is a law that prescribes who is allowed to buy a gun, and so on and so on. I think that we are not discovering nothing new. I think that for many things we are actually using, there are rules to produce it, to store it, to sell it, and to use them. And there might be even not too prescriptive, because you want to allow anyone to use a knife for a kitchen, but not want to kill a person with a knife. I think we are again discovering these things, which has a huge, larger impact in data, because of course, you can just analyze the mobile traces of our phones to decide anything about religion, prescription, medicine, and anything, because just looking at where people go, you can understand a lot of things. I would suggest that we try to be a little bit more divided in part. So let's split the problem in the data itself and how you want to use the data and how you analyze the data, and you're allowed to analyze the data. Otherwise, I think we will never get out of these loops that forbids, in many cases, to use any data because you may be able to. I think that possibility is not a good thing. Ever you say, no, you can't, or you're allowed to. That's my opinion.
Right, I just want to follow on from that and turn a question over to Mark there about how do you see the role of science clusters to set the rules and policies, which, I mean, Mauro touched on rules and policies, right, for EOSC. What do you think they...
Right.
all our science clusters is there.
We certainly don't do it with sticks, guns, or knives, or anything like that.
Yeah, I know, especially now. Yeah, it was a bit.
So the science cluster. So I'm not sure how much it follows on from that last discussion, because most of my colleagues are about defining policies that are going to enable us to do things. This other approach of restriction is not so much in my landscape, but of course there are scientific fields with sensitive medical data and other privacy issues that need to be dealt with. But I would see that the EOSC and the underlying architecture there is about enabling sharing the data, and it's up to various bodies for implying the policies that relate to the law and things like that. I'm not sure that that's a big discussion in some of the science clusters that are close to the one that I'm in. It's more about enabling to share things, and I would say that the role of the science clusters has been as a kind of interdisciplinary engine. Even within a science cluster, there are parts of fields which have not really touched each other very much before in terms of data, which are now, like solar data and planetary data that we see on the astronomy side. But we are brought into contact with particle physics, and now we also now have a network of these 5 science clusters, and they have come together in many different ways to build common. There's common position statements, for example. There are official documents about the common position statements of the clusters from earth science, from life science, social science, photon nuclear science, astronomy, and particle physics. And they are a part of EOSC, and they are kind of uniquely positioned in terms of connecting the real users. I mean, we have real users that come along and do science with the tools that are there now and are listening to talks about how the vision of the EOSC will change the way they do science. They are inspired by that, but there needs to be substance behind it. And so we've done this first step, I think, of connecting science clusters together. I mean, I'm talking to social scientists and photon nuclear scientists that I would not have done if the EOSC wasn't there. And so that has a real value for making the networks and bringing out these topics for interdisciplinary science topics. I think still that just being in the common system is a huge value in itself, that we might use the same system for PIDs or for AAI as used in social science. I think there's a common ground there. So if the clusters can be together saying policies for those things are important, then that's a good thing. And then the interdisciplinary science cases are something a bit more special. You can't really predict those. You can't predict scientific discovery. You can't predict how bringing social science and astronomy together is going to bring something new, but it does. But we can't. It's harder to plan it. But if you set the conditions for it to flourish, then you see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a few questions come from Slido.
Yeah, there is a question that I think is Mark has partially answered. That's why I want to pick this up now. So the virtual observatory builders are also astronomy users. This puts science right at the center. Should EOSC builders in general also be the EOSC users, and why? And this question is from Stephen Sergeant.
Stephen Sergeant is well known, and to us, yes, one of the aspects that I often emphasize is that part of the success in sharing astronomy data is that the institutes, the bodies, the infrastructures that are making the data available are also the ones implementing those standards. You are not having one body decide the standards and someone else implement them. There's a kind of coherence there. The people who are implementing the standards are also the ones helping to build them. So I think this is an important message, but I think it's also a big challenge to do that at the level of EOSC, where the level is much higher. I find myself, you sort of see a much wider landscape now with data sharing in social science or in environmental science, how do we get all those people together to decide on the standards? So that's where the difficult part is, I think, and perhaps we've got the first step with the defining EOSC as a core, and then interoperability layer, and I think that layered approach is probably the right way, but maybe it's difficult to get the users involved in defining the standards for EOSC because it's so wide, I would say.
And I was just going to make a reflection on that as well, and kind of looping back to this discussion before about the role of the research communities, because I think, as Françoise has said before, we have to support the existing practice within research communities, within EOSC. We can't ask people to change. So I think the standards that come out of each of the different domains are the core standards for how that data is described, how it's understood, how it's reused. And there will be some kind of cross-cutting elements like the PIDs, like the AAI, like maybe the generic metadata for discovery. And I think that's where, you know, the groups that are within EOSC will help to set those standards, but I don't think it's going to be the researchers, because their interests are in how they're describing their own data. It's in the domain aspects. It's not in that kind of horizontal cross-cutting elements. So I think there's kind of two levels of standards that we're working on. And I think it's kind of like the EOSC communities, the e-infrastructures, the people who are actively building it, who will do those horizontal standards. And that's one important element, but we really can't overlook the role of the research communities themselves and their standards. And we have to ensure that they're supported within EOSC, and that the different rules that every community works to, like astronomy has entirely open data, and that's appropriate for astronomy. For social sciences, it's not. And our rules at the EOSC level have to support all those different practices.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Anything to say? I have one more question I wanted to ask, but okay. So, how can we accelerate this? We saw about the policy development from Sofia's slides earlier. How can we accelerate the exchange between those who have developed policies and put them in place, and those who are not, or at the beginning of this process? How can we help move this forward, this exchange? Any views, takers on that?
Well, I can start. I think by knowing what is already in place, and I think that the monitoring might be very useful for that as well. It's a way of sharing what we have in different countries, and a way of sharing knowledge on the different policies and practices that we have, and that can then form the basis as to initiate discussions as well, to know who you're going to talk to, and who might be appropriate to exchange these experiences with as well. So by sharing these best practices with each other, we have a sort of matchmaking where we can approach those who have already made some progress on the area, and initiate a dialogue.
Okay. And who should take the lead there? Any thoughts there? Who should take the lead on this specific action, or any other action that we discussed earlier? Any thoughts on that? No?
Well, I think that this is something that we all need to do together. So I think we have a joint responsibility on that, and we can't sort of push the responsibility over to somebody else, so to speak. But I think that the key here is coordination as well. I mean, I think we have different contexts and settings in different countries. But if we look at Sweden, for example, here we have different assignments connected to open science that are currently sitting with different government agencies. So the National Library has an assignment on open access to publications, and the Swedish Research Council has a coordination assignment on open access to research data. And now, since recently, the higher education institutions also have an assignment on promoting open science practices. So it's important that we all coordinate and I say in the recent report that we have done on this national work, we have suggested that a national strategy might be useful for that, where you can outline the responsibilities and the roles of all the different actors and how they can cooperate.
Any other views from the panel?
I don't quite understand. If you are asking on the national levels, so there are some groups organizing almost in every country. There are national initiatives for open science. This is developed just through the NIFOS project. So the goal of this coordination is to put the people who are already involved in some European projects and European initiatives to put together their effort and to make something useful for on the national level. But if you ask us for the coordination on the European level, so I think this is the good way. Now we are coordinating from some EOSC groups, some European Commission groups. So, and I think that there are quite a lot of exchanging, especially in the last 2 years, where those Zoom meetings are, I think, all the time. Filling the survey or being at the Zoom meeting. So, and I think that are quite.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments, questions, comments from the audience? Or from Slido? No? Nothing? Are we done? Thank you, the panel. Thanks very much for your time.